Hail and well met, Slayers of Giants. If you're watching this on video and you're saying to yourself, is he in his car? Yes, this is the consequence for missing a self-imposed deadline. I now am recording in my car so I don't wake up my family. So, as punishments go for missing a self-imposed deadline, this one is certainly strange, but I don't think it's overly unfair. So here I am in my car recording this next episode. This is Chapter 5 of my serial novel, Tilting at Windmills. Remember, this is a draft. I'll be very grateful for your feedback throughout, so please comment away on whatever platform you're finding this and become a patron of my Patreon or Substack, or subscribe to my Substack, and you'll get a little reminder each week when a new chapter comes out. Tilting at Windmills, Chapter 5. Singular, plural, and perhaps. While Serge and Rolando were delayed by their battle with the giant Hirvarad, Benjamin zipped past them in the passenger seat of his son's 2004 Pontiac Vibe. His son had excellent taste in music and chose a playlist he labeled Oldies, which were mostly songs from the 90s and early 2000s, so Benjamin was able to sing along. His son, renowned for his kindness and his generally chill energy, treated his father with exceptional gentleness, recognizing the grim mood Benjamin tried to hide. When they arrived at his son's house, the two men unloaded the overstuffed suitcases into the garage. It's far cheaper to carry as much as possible in a suitcase, even with the oversized luggage fees, than to mail packages internationally. And then his son showed Benjamin to the couch, where he'd be sleeping for some indeterminate amount of time before flying on to begin his new life in Cleveland, Ohio. Benjamin couldn't pull the trigger on purchasing his one-way ticket because he didn't know if he'd need to stop in Salt Lake City for an in-person meeting as an initial step in a lawsuit against the corporation which had stolen his soon-to-be ex-wife's retail store right before they left for Spain, a complication which had made their financial situation there even more impossible. Now that they'd returned, they'd be able to pursue the case and possibly rebuild their lives separately with a settlement, if the American court system could produce even an iota of justice. Considering it had taken almost a year to find a lawyer willing to take their case, Benjamin was skeptical. But he had to try, so he found himself leaving the purgatorio of a failed marriage and entering the limbo of American institutionalized injustice. Not sure if he'd be in Oregon for weeks or just a few days, Benjamin had reached out to a few friends to schedule a possible meetup. Like the court case, this racked him with conflicting feelings. During his year in Spain, only a few of his closest friends had reached out. In keeping with his naive nature, he'd convinced himself the others were too busy with their lives, and he reminded himself they were enduring the difficulties he'd fled. Still, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling they were uncomfortable with his decision to leave. Though he couldn't be sure, this narrator can report definitively that these silent friends fell into three groups. The first were those who felt he was crazy to abandon his country over something they saw as a minor political blip. The second were those who wished they could leave as well, and Benjamin's choice made them uncomfortable because it made them feel guilty to know they could have done the same if they'd found the courage. And the third were those who were actively relieved to see Benjamin go. Though they'd been close friends at some point, his increasingly strident concerns about social justice issues made him somewhat exhausting to be around, and his move provided a convenient opportunity to end the relationship without any direct confrontation. Now, Benjamin's return complicated all those motives, and the three categories became six. Those who'd thought he was crazy were now subdivided into those who'd figured out he was onto something and didn't want to admit it, and those who still wanted to believe the political situation wasn't that big a deal. The ones who wanted to leave as well were split into those who saw his return as vindication of their choice to remain, and those who felt despair at the reminder their own exit strategies were so far from reality. And those who'd been relieved to have a geographic excuse to end the friendship were now split into those who thought it would be too obvious if they didn't make contact when he returned, and those who felt they'd successfully escaped and didn't want to compromise that now. And many of his friends, regardless of which of those six categories they inhabited, were also firmly in the seventh. Benjamin's current situation was just a giant bummer. Considering all the justified reasons to avoid him, Benjamin was surprised by how many friends showed up to say another round of goodbyes. He'd chosen a very cool book-themed pub in Portland, fitting for a group of authors he knew from his publishing life and educators from his teacher life. By his son's count, more than 30 showed up. Benjamin didn't have a brief version of his story to tell each one, because unlike this narrator, who's gliding through Benjamin's part of the story without dilly-dallying on details like the decor in the pub, the names of all the teachers and authors, and Benjamin's food order, Benjamin lacked the ability to tell any story briefly. But honestly, how many readers need to know that the Rose City Book Pub has an excellent grilled cheese sandwich, or that Rookie's Pub in Monmouth has a bacon cheeseburger with Tillamook cheddar, or that these two events were amalgamated into one for the sake of this story? This narrator is far more interested in the tale of Rolando and Serge, and understands you certainly are also. Before Benjamin left for the party, Rolando and Serge arrived at the very same complex of houses where Benjamin's son lived, but they didn't go to the same address. Instead, Rolando directed Serge to park on the street in front of the conjoined houses. "We will stay in this inn for the night, recover our strength, and decide where we should travel next," Rolando declared. "This isn't a hotel," Serge said. "Of course not. I said inn. They're different. Follow me, my good squire, and you shall see." Rolando swung out of the passenger seat, ascended the concrete steps to the house next to Benjamin's son's, seeming to choose the door at random, and he knocked by tapping the skull of Poe in the middle of the heavy aluminum door, scratching the bright burgundy paint. A young woman opened the door. A student at Oregon State University, Maddie wore a bright orange shirt with a large O and S overlaid one atop the other. The pink highlights in her blonde hair were fading, and everything about her looked disheveled, a state produced by a long day of essay writing followed by a late evening of drinking. She'd had a terrible year of school ever since she moved into this particular house, though she couldn't put her finger on any major life event which had caused her constant stress. It just seemed like everything sucked. She didn't know why. "Hello?" she asked. "Greetings, madam. I am Lord Rolando de Santa Maria del Pi of Barcelona. I require only one room, for my squire is willing to sleep at the foot of my bed. Would 1,000 of your American dollars be sufficient for a single night's stay?" This isn't, Maddie stumbled, then processed. Yes, I can get that ready for you. Just give me, come in. I'll just get that room ready." Rolando turned to Serge. "I think there is something odd about this inn." Serge had just stepped up onto the porch behind him and caught the end of the exchange. "It's not an inn, Sir Rolando. It's her house." Rolando shook his head. "You misunderstand me, my friend. Of course she lives in this inn. And of course it is an inn. She's preparing our room presently. What I mean is that there is something magical going on here. We must discover it, lest we become enchanted in our sleep." He stepped across the threshold into the tiny foyer, the length of a doorway and the width of a hall. On his left, a different door led to a bathroom, and on his right, a door led to a bedroom. A cubby collected the shoes of the house's 3 roommates, and a half flight of stairs led up to the small kitchenette and living room. Another flight of stairs, this one curving halfway, led back up to Maddie's room and the bedroom of Todd, her roommate who stayed at his girlfriend's every night but still paid rent. Maddie had decided she could take the couch in the living room for a night if Todd made a rare appearance, but she gambled he'd never know anyone had stayed in his bed, and she could pocket more than her share of the rent without anyone being the wiser. She padded barefoot up to Todd's room, threw the clean laundry on the bed, on top of the pile of dirty laundry in the corner, and did the most rudimentary job of making the bed in the history of inns. Then she ran downstairs so quickly she bounced off a shoulder in the turn, and she came to a stop halfway down to the 2 men standing just inside her doorway. "Right this way," she said. "Shoes on or off, it doesn't matter," she lied. As they reached the main floor, she pointed to the kitchen. I can make you some... I think I have bagels and there's some beer in the fridge." She pointed into the living room. "If you want to watch some TV, we don't have local channels, but we have a couple streaming services." Rolando looked around the room, assessing but not expressing his judgment. Maddie said, "Let me show you to your room." Upstairs, she pointed to the shared bathroom, the sink covered in bottles of various sizes and dimensions. A surge protector was necessary to distribute electricity to the curler, electric toothbrushes, razors, and other devices hiding amongst the tinctures and tubes. "And there's extra toilet paper under the sink, I'm pretty sure." Then she opened the door to Todd's room. "Sorry about the mess. I can do some more cleaning if you want, or..." "This will be satisfactory," Rolando said. "I prefer to sleep on a bed," Serge told Rolando. "Would you have a second room for another $1,000? He asked Maddie. Flustered, she pulled out her phone. "I could text my roommate and..." No, you know what? That would be fine. Just let me get my..." "Oh, I wouldn't want to put you out," Serge said. "I can sleep on the couch, or..." He turned to his new employer. "I mean, if you want to give me the $1,000, I'm sure I can find a different hotel." "No," Maddie squeaked. "Really, it's no trouble at all. Let me get that all ready for you." Rolando scowled. "A squire ought to sleep at the foot of his master's bed, just in case his master should require anything in the wee hours of the morning. But I suppose..." And then he stopped suddenly, cocked his head to the side, and sniffed the air. "Sorry," Maddie said. "Todd, my other roommate, he..." Rolando looked through the door, down the hall.
Madam, I think it would be best if we rented that second room for my squire. Lead me to it, if you would, that I might inspect it."
"Well, I really ought to clean up a little," she said, but Rolando stepped past her into the hall and opened the door. Maddie's room sported band posters tacked to the wall, and behind her computer's monitor she'd created a collage of printed photos of family members in backgrounds, identifying reunions at various national parks, mixed with group photos of co-eds at parties, red plastic cups in hand, facial expressions alternating between duck lips aimed at the camera, guffaws aimed at one another, and drunken eyes aimed in slightly different directions at nothing at all. Her clean clothes were more carefully hung and folded than Todd's, but a pile of dirty clothes lay on the floor next to the empty hamper she used to transport them back and forth to the washer and dryer in the garage beneath the kitchen. She wedged herself around Rolando and kicked at the pile until her t-shirts covered her underwear. Rolando ignored her and continued to sniff, then saw what he was looking for on top of a cardboard box on the single shelf above her hanging clothes in the far corner of her closet.
"Madam, this room will do nicely. And if you could go prepare those bagels and beers you mentioned, I think those victuals would be worth 1,000. But, what kind of cream cheese do you have?"
I think it's just the normal kind." He reached into his coat and pulled out a stack of bills held together by a paper band. He began flicking through them as he counted silently.
"I am sorry to be so difficult, but if you would run to the store and purchase some of the cream cheese that has chives already mixed in, and perhaps some of those bagels which have a coating of dried onions for my squire." He turned to Serge. "How do you like your bagels, Sarah Sanchez?"
If they have blueberry cream cheese, that's the best. On the bagels with raisins?"
Rolando scoffed. "It's really more of a dessert at that point, isn't it?" Rolando turned to Maddie. "But if that's what he prefers, could you acquire those for us for, say, $3,000, with the rooms, of course?"
I mean, sure," Maddie said, looking at the cash in his hand, "though 4,000 might be more fair."
"Of course, 4,000 it is."
Rolando counted off the bills, pulled them out of the band, and handed them to Maddie. She fled down the stairs towards her car, where she would scream in pleasure at her good fortune before making a trip to the grocery store. When Rolando heard the front door close, he turned to Serge.
"We probably should have asked for things that were more difficult to acquire. We'll have to devise some hand signals so I can direct you to buy time with something like a specific brand of caviar, if we ever find ourselves in a situation like this in the future."
I don't know any brands of caviar," Serge said.
"Excellent. Then we shall only need one hand signal. But now we must be quick." He turned into the room. "Come out of there, Duende. Better you present yourself than I discover you with the point of my sword."
Serge hadn't seen the creature in the closet, but when it flopped down to the carpet, then bounded up onto Maddie's bed, it appeared just as solid and real as the giant had. Its skin was olive, not the shade people describe as olive for humans of Mediterranean, Arab, Persian, Indian, Southeast Asian, South Pacific Islander, or Latino descent, the majority of the world's population wrapped up in a single descriptor imprecise enough to capture them all, but more like a genuine green olive one might find around a stuffing of sweet red pepper pimento. It wore a pointy pimento red hat, a dark green shirt, and beige pants, the ensemble tied together by red shoes which matched the hat in color and in the pointy toes curling up from the bed's comforter. It had no mustache or beard, but when it grinned up at Rolando, its teeth were such a dark yellow they almost matched the beige of its pants. "A gnome?" Serge asked.
"No, though it is cousin to the gnomes. This is a duende. Tell us your name, Duende." "I am Lord Rolando de Santa Maria del Pi of Barcelona, and this is Squire Sanchez de—" He turned to Serge. "Where were you born, Sarah?"
"Hillsborough," Serge said, though, like Benjamin, he was technically born somewhere other than where his parents lived at the time of his birth, since the hospital was in Portland proper. Serge didn't know that. Rolando turned back to the Duende.
"This is Squire Sanchez de Hillsborough. How ought we to address you, Duende?"
"My name is Charles,"
the Duende said. His voice was pinched and raspier than Serge expected, and the pause before his name sounded suspicious. Rolando held up his cane and whispered to the skull of Poe. Serge started when the ghost of the bird flew straight through the wall from the street-facing side of the house and alighted on Rolando's shoulder.
"Poe, this Duende says his name is Charles. Is that his name?"
The ghost raven flapped its wings once as it leapt down next to the Duende, which dodged back, then tried to stand its ground. Poe examined the Duende, tilting its head back and forth in tick-tock motions, then pecking once at the Duende's shoulder.
"Ouch!"
the Duende shouted. Poe turned back to Rolando and shook its head.
"You do not taste like a Charles," Rolando said. "What is your name, truly, Duende?"
Clyde?"
Poe pecked it again.
Son of a bitch!
the duende exclaimed. Poe shook its head. Rolando mirrored the gesture. Try again, duende.
Brian? Shit! Ow! Arnold? Fucking A, that hurts, you piece of...
Tell me your true name, duende.
Fine, damn ghost bird.
He sneered at Poe as the raven leapt from Maddie's bed onto Rolando's shoulder.
My name is Kudori Nazolzad.
Rolando looked at Poe. Poe nodded his head, up and down dramatically. Well met, Kudori Nazolzad. Rolando greeted the duende. Now we may converse as acquaintances.
Fine. What do you want to talk about, Sir Knight?
What brings you here to Corvallis?
Oh, I was just wandering around and found this place by chance.
Rolando held up his cane. The skull of Poe began to glow. Kudori Nazolzad, I command you to tell me the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth on penalty of great physical pain. The glow receded. Now, what truly brought you to Corvallis?
Like I said, I was just wandering along and...
He jerked forward as though something had poked him in the kidneys.
Gods take you to fourth hell, that hurts. Fine, I was sent. But don't ask me to tell you who sent me, because I'm bound to keep that secret on pain of death, so you'll torture me, but they'll kill me dead on the spot, before I get halfway through telling you who they are. Please, ask me anything else.
What have you been doing here in Corvallis?
Oh, that I can tell you. The normal. I make a nest in someone's house and cause trouble. Small stuff. I steal individual socks so they can't find the matcher. I move the corkscrew from one drawer to another in the kitchen. Shits and giggles stuff. Nothing else. I swear. And the students here are great because they mostly only live in a place for a year. So I can move from one house to another, make somebody's life a little more stressful, steal their food, have some fun, and just when they might be getting wise, I move to some other student's house. They just have one really bad year of college, don't know why, and I get to do my thing.
Rolando turned to Serge. Duendes are mischief makers, like gremlins, basically parasites, but they attach themselves to homes, not people, and they may only move away when they successfully evict the home's residents. You get a duende, you need to move. You stay, and it will make you miserable, but it will also be trapped. They're like bedbugs, but more creative.
Thank you,
Kudori Nuzzleshead said, flattered by the compliment. So you've been making this woman miserable all year?
Not just her, the whole house, all 20 of them.
Serge looked at Rolando. 20?
The entire inn, Rolando said. He does not recognize the different dwellings as distinct. They are all joined in one building, and he has claimed the entire building.
Well, not all of it,
the duende said, kicking at a fold in the comforter like he might dislodge a pebble outdoors.
I can't get into the south wing. Gods be damned, Aunt Hannah keeps me out.
Rolando's face brightened.
And Aunt Hannah next door?
Yeah, the little brat squirts me with her magic every time I even poke my head in over there. Haven't managed to steal a single sock. And they have all these different kinds of beers and sodas from different parts of the world, and I haven't been able to sip one.
Why is this Aunt Hannah there?
You got me, go ask her. In fact, if you distract her, maybe I can get one of the Japanese sodas or Korean beers they got over there.
Rolando turned to Serge.
The Aunt Hannah may have better answers for us than Kudori Nazolzad here.
What's an Anhana? Serge asked.
They are sprites who generally live in small bodies of water in forests. It's unusual to find one near human habitation, even more rare to find one living in a house. But when they do decide to inhabit a human's home, they offer protection. They are secretive about why they choose the humans they choose, so we will be careful not to ask directly. But maybe she will tell us something which can guide us towards the origin of the curse.
The curse?
Kudori Nazolzad repeated. He tapped on the side of his nose with a long pink fingernail that almost matched the color of his hat.
I can't tell you who sent me here, but the curse, they know.
Serge frowned. So we have to figure out who sent him, but he can't tell us. But if the Anhana can tell us who sent the duende, then we can find them, and they can tell us about the curse.
Is that correct? Kudori Nazolzad?
Rolando asked.
Whole truth? I don't know. Lots of maybes in there. Maybe if the Anhana can tell you, if she even knows, then maybe, if you could even find them, then maybe, he tapped the side of his nose and winked, maybe they could tell you what they certainly know about the curse on this god's-forsaken, blighted, doomed nation.
Doomed? Serge said.
Hey, there's a reason I'm not choosing housing that's more permanent. The USA is a rent-not-buy situation, Squire Sanchez of Eelsboro. Hillsboro, Serge corrected. He made a roller coaster motion with his hand. Hills, a town of hills. The duende shrugged. Doesn't make as much sense as a town of eels, but okay. Rolando agreed with the duende, but felt the pressure of time. The innkeeper may return soon, and it would be best if she didn't find us talking to the duende who lives in her closet. As I told you, other humans will not understand what you can now see, Sarah Sanchez, and they may think you are quite strange, perhaps even dangerous, if they believe you are talking to beings they cannot perceive. Serge nodded vigorously. Right, and that's why we can't just go next door and say, hey, a little green not-a-gnome next door said you have a water fairy in your house. Can we interrogate her and learn what a giant and a duende wouldn't tell us? They'd call the cops. Rolando became thoughtful. True, and I am not interested in doing battle with the civil authorities just yet, so let us elect subterfuge for now. Okay, Serge agreed. Wait, what? But Rolando moved on to the next phase in his plan. With a click of his tongue and a pair of quick hand motions, he sent Poe through the wall, not toward the street this time, but directly into the neighboring house. The raven flew through the different rooms, finding them empty, and then stood at the top of the lower staircase, watching as Benjamin and his son put on their shoes and discussed the advantages and disadvantages of a particular class of playable character in a Warhammer Space Marines video game, as they prepared to leave for Benjamin's get-together with his friends. When the father and son departed, Poe flew back through the wall and spiraled up the stairs to Maddie's room, startling Serge because the raven had left through the opposite wall and now appeared in the doorway behind them. As of yet, Serge hadn't heard the bird speak, but when the skull-less ghost raven alighted on Rolando's shoulder, it began to explain its findings. The raven's voice was not the loud, screechy one Serge expected. Instead, in a low, near whisper, Poe told Rolando about the empty rooms and the two men leaving. But the entire monologue was in Catalan, a language distinct from the English or Spanish Serge knew. Some words sounded familiar, but the only ones he could pick out clearly were war, hammer, space, and marine, and these created more confusion than clarity. Rolando turned to Serge. The time is right, my good squire. Do you know how to pick a lock? Serge shook his head quickly, taken aback. I've never needed to break into anywhere. This fact speaks to your virtue. However, it does not hurt to prepare for eventualities before they become necessities, my friend. But no matter. I will get us inside by magical means. He motioned Serge down the stairs toward Maddie's front door, and as the men reached her foyer, Rolando asked, What have you eaten today? I had a Snickers bar before I started my shift while I was on my way to the airport. Rolando frowned. So probably an empty stomach by now. Best to be prepared, though. As he stepped out of Maddie's front door and onto the shared porch in front of Benjamin's son's house, he fished a plastic bag out of one of the interior pockets of his coat, examined it, then returned it and pulled out a larger one. He handed the bag to Serge while standing on tiptoes and looking through one of the small panes of glass in the door, peering down to see as much of the floor as he could. One has to be careful, he muttered, lest he end up halfway into a wall. Have to get the maths just right. Wait, what? Serge asked again. Did you just say we could end up in a wall? And did you just say maths, plural? Of course. I know some people are, as you say, loosey-goosey with the pluralization of the abbreviation of mathematics. But I am very specific. I say math in a singular when I am referring to a single problem of simple addition. Maybe simple subtraction, but really anything else involves more than one kind of mathematics. So maths is more correct. And certainly, in this case, since we are about to perform a bit of non-Euclidean geometry. He held up his cane, pointed the head slightly forward as though he intended to knock gently on the door, but before the raven's skull made contact with the painted aluminum, he completed the spell. If time had not been a dimension included in the spell, it might not have gone so badly for Serge. In an instant, the squire felt his head change places with his feet, his right side change places with his left side, and his front change places with his back. Unfortunately for him, time also dilated, so this instant was stretched to a point somewhere between his immediate present and infinity. During that stretched-out moment, Serge was aware his dimensions had flipped, and though his insides and outsides didn't reverse, he felt like they had. Rolando placed the two men at the location he'd identified when looking through the window, but in the midst of the time dilation, the Earth rotated somewhere between a millimeter and a near-infinite number of complete revolutions. And while the compromise in time felt like 5.5 seconds, the compromise of distance was almost 2 inches, meaning as they arrived at their new location, the floor yanked them sideways, like stepping onto an escalator which was moving far too quickly and then halted just as suddenly.
Rolando put out his arms to balance himself, then turned to Serge, grabbed the young man's wrist, and pushed the bag in Serge's hand toward his mouth. Serge understood Rolando's motive just in time to place the bag against his lips before he projectile vomited. The bag caught most of it, though some of the bile and undigested bits of peanuts managed to escape through his nose. "Yes, it is unpleasant," Rolando said. "Come, let us get you some tissues." The house had an identical layout to Maddie's, so the door to their immediate left was a bathroom. Serge stole some toilet paper and made a valiant effort to clear the burning stomach acid out of his sinuses. As he finished, he caught sight of Rolando examining the toilet with more curiosity than Serge felt it deserved. "Not here," Rolando mumbled. "Perhaps in the kitchen." Serge followed Rolando up the half-flight of stairs to the living room. Benjamin's son and his roommates kept a very tidy house. The dinette table was completely covered by a complex tabletop board game, complete with a map, cards, dice, and many small plastic figures. Over in the room's far corner, a 3D printer hummed softly as it crafted another of those pieces. Otherwise, the room was pristine, the coffee table clear, the kitchen counters clear, the cupboards closed, and the single visible set of shelving neatly organized. Only 2 objects had been left on the entertainment center in front of the television, and those video game controllers were placed in chargers intentionally located in parallel spots equidistant from the television's edges. On the wall next to the couch, a huge banner showed an image of Pedro Pascal in a pink sweater under block letters reading, "Daddy State of Mind." Serge examined the banner, then turned to Rolando. "I just immediately like the people who live here. Is that an enchantment?" "No, well, sort of. It is the cause, not the effect, I think. Come." He led Serge into the kitchen and examined the stainless steel sink. Rolando leaned forward and sniffed, then straightened. "Yes, she is here." He turned on the tap and let the water run into the disposal. "Madam," he said, his voice gentle but projected, like someone trying to get the attention of a toddler or easily frightened animal on the other side of a large room. "My name is Lord Rolando de Santa Maria del Pi of Barcelona, and this is my esquire, the good Sergio Sanchez of Hillsborough. We have some very important questions to ask you." The Anhana didn't rise up out of the disposal, nor did she come down out of the tap. Instead, she stepped sideways out of the stream of flowing water. She looked like a glass statue of a slender woman with long, wavy hair, but her body had a faint blue glow, and the hair a slight golden one. She stood in the sink, 8 inches tall, then slightly shorter when she put a fist on her hip and leaned forward, head tilted, looking up at Rolando. "Perhaps and perhaps," she said. Her voice sounded like something made of tinkling of ice in water. "Perhaps?" Rolando asked. "And perhaps," she repeated. "Perhaps you have come to ask me questions, or perhaps you have come to distract me so the duende next door can sneak into this house. Perhaps your questions are important, or perhaps they are predictable and boring, but my answers are important. And perhaps you come from a forest like me, or perhaps it really is only a single pine tree belonging to this Santa Maria you mentioned." Rolando smiled. "Ah, my lady, you are correct, and correct. The location in my name is a reference to an square in the heart of the city of Barcelona, a square next to the Basilica de Santa Maria del Pi, and the square and perhaps the basilica get their name from a single pi, a pine tree, which once stood in that square. But the tree is long gone. There are trees there now. I believe they are Mediterranean hackberries. And some bright green parrots roost in them and sing loudly, their calls echoing through the alleys and entertaining the people eating at the outdoor seating of the various restaurants around the square. It is a lively, beautiful square, and I think you would enjoy it, but it is no forest." He blinked at the ceiling, wistful, then returned his gaze to the Anhana. "And you are correct about our questions. Surely they will be predictable and boring to you, but your answers will be quite important to us. And you are also correct about the duende. We have no desire to distract you for his benefit, but he is hoping we will do him that service, regardless of our intentions, that he may sneak in here and take possession of the entire inn. In fact, I believe he is trying to sneak in this very moment." Rolando clicked his teeth, calling Poe to his shoulder, and then he made a tiny motion with his head and spoke a command in Catalan. The skullless raven flapped its bony wings and launched itself across the small kitchen, inserting its translucent head and shoulders into the hood above the oven in quick jabs while it flapped furiously and hovered there. "Ouch!" Kudori Nuzzle said. His voice echoed from within the square metal pipe. "Gats be damned, buzzard! That hurts! Ow, fine! I'm leaving! Curse you! Go choke on your own feathers, you zombie bird!"
Rolando continued speaking to the Antana in the sink. I apologize that our intrusion allowed the duende to get even that far, milady. Will you hear our boring questions and give us your important answers before the humans return? And will you grace us with your name, so that my squire here can include it in the account of my adventures he composes each night, such that people far and wide may know of your beauty and wisdom?
Serge felt a host of mixed emotions, an unjustified shame that he'd never done an essential element of his job before, surprise at discovering a new responsibility, anxiety at his own estimation of his unworthiness to complete this task, arousal at the appearance of the beautiful naked water nymph standing in the sink, disgust at his own arousal by a creature only 8 inches tall and seemingly made of water, and to top it all off, a strong urge to urinate, spurred by the constant flow from the sink's tap.
My name is Lady Oshwarabelia Lawanze, but you may call me Shwar. And yes, we should keep this brief. I selected this particular house because I'm smitten with the humans who live here. They simply delight me. So I give them luck and protect them from the duende who would harm them in his small, irritating ways. Do you see, Sera Sanchez? Rolando said. It is as I told you. The people who reside in this portion of the inn are not enchanting you, nor are they enchanted by some malignant power forcing you to like them. Instead, they have appealed to this magical lady, and she blesses them.
He turned back to Oshwaribelia Lawanze.
But Lady Shwar, surely these humans are not the reason you have left some far-off forest and chosen to live in a human habitation in Corbais.
You speak truly, Sir Knight. I only discovered my humans after I was sent here to Corvallis.
Who gave you this charge, and for what purpose, my lady?
I was sent by Lady Iriel Honan, mistress of the Panther Tail, the Lady of the Great Lake. She has sent Anhanas to many locations across this cursed land in an attempt to protect it and discover the source of the curse.
So you don't know the cause of the curse? Serge asked.
No, simple squire, I have not been able to discover it, but then I mostly hide out in the plumbing here, blessing my humans and warding off the duende.
Rolando pointed a thumb over his shoulder. The duende says he was sent as well, but he cannot tell us by whom.
Perhaps the Lady Ariel Honan would know.
Where would we find her? Rolando asked.
She is the Lady of the Great Lake Iriel Honan, known to the locals as Lake Erie, so you will find her there. Since you two are bound to the land, you will need to be on the shore, of course. I suggest the southern shore of her lake in Cleveland, Ohio. And, Squire Sanchez, will you please step a bit to your right?
Serge followed the direction of her waving hand, unsure why. The Anhana pointed beyond him, and a beam of glowing water squirted from her fingertip. When it made contact with the hand of the duende reaching through the wall, a spark of electricity raced through it and shocked him.
Goblin balls, that hurt!
Kudori Nuzzlezed's muffled shout resonated through the wall.
Lady Oshwaribelia Luanze didn't miss a beat. Go to Cleveland and speak with the Lady of the Great Lake. Pledge yourself to her service. Then perhaps she will tell you who is behind the curse plaguing this land.
Rolando looked crestfallen. Serge shrugged. What? Seems straightforward enough to me. We go to Cleveland.
Yes, my squire. We will go to this land of cleaving and seek out the Lady of the Great Lake. But I fear it will not be so simple as you think.
If you're excited about this project, please subscribe on YouTube or like and share on TikTok or Reels or whatever app you're on now. And if you're willing to support me as I craft this novel in serial form, please consider supporting my Substack or Patreon. Each week I'll give a shout out to some of those patrons. This week I'm thanking Substack followers Carolyn McWilliams, Gail Smith Rynolds, and Larry Carter Jr. Thank you all for your support. And if any listeners or creators who have something to plug, please email NotAPipePublishing at NotAPipePublishing@gmail.com. See you back here next week for Chapter 6 of Tilting at Windmills. Teaser, how do you talk with a person who lives in a lake during a cold snap when it's -3 degrees in Cleveland and the entire lake is frozen? I don't know either. Come back next week and we'll find out how Rolando manages.